Welcome to the Hublife Podcast. We are so glad that we are joined today by two of our Thetford volunteers. So today we've got Rich and we've got Alice.
Your favourite volunteers, I think.
I can't say that on camera. You really put me on the spot there and I wasn't sure what to do. Yes, they are my favourite volunteers, as are all of my volunteers.
Well played, well
Nice.
played.
Thanks.
Diplomatic.
Anyway, so Rich has been with us for just over a year now, Rich,
Yes.
is that right? In the warehouse. And then Alice, you've been with us what feels like forever. So how long have you been with us now?
Year and a half?
No, it's
2
not.
years?
It's
More
longer
than that. Feels
yeah.
more than that.
2.5 years? I don't know.
But you've been with us in the warehouse and on client
Yes.
sessions, so
Yes.
so we are very lucky to have them here today.
Yeah, and we are excited to chat to volunteers from the food bank rather than outside agencies and all that sort of stuff, because it's just to get a little bit of a different perspective, especially, to do all things food bank, but particularly Trussell's vision of ending the need for food bank in the UK. And so, before we get into that, really, what I want to ask you is the most important question. What motivated you to become volunteers of Thetford Food Bank? What, you crazy individuals?
What made you want to come and work with us?
Yeah, well, two things really. Why volunteer at all with anything? Because so many people don't. Yep. And then, but why specifically food bank? And maybe perhaps what, how has the experience shaped your understanding and experience of food poverty or food banks as well? So, go.
Up to you.
All right, okay. For me, I only moved to the area 2.5 years ago. So, I didn't actually know much of the community at all. And with my job, it came with volunteer days. So I was genuinely looking for something to use those volunteer days for.
So you didn't have to go to work?
Yeah.
See the-
So you get 2 days in a year. So obviously I did more than that when I started. But it was through trying to find a charity to use that with. That's how I found the food bank. And then when I got started, I loved it so much. It's such a great team and it's such a great cause that, I've continued well long after those 14 hours were up.
Yeah, thanks for that, hon.
You didn't let her go.
Oh, yeah, I didn't. Please don't go.
I sort of semi-retired just before the pandemic.
You're not old enough, are you, though?
I know. Blame my mother for these lovely cheekbones. But I was looking for sort of stuff to do, and during the pandemic, I kind of did some volunteering at the vaccination centre and just got a taste for sort of helping people out. And then I did some work for the RSPCA. Obviously, no one could help the RSPCA, so they did this kind of online thing and are asking for people with my kind of background, so I helped them out. And then when that came to the end, and at the end of the pandemic, I was looking around thinking, well, I really enjoyed that. What needs help? And I kind of looked around at local food banks and emailed Steph.
Yay! And I've said yes, please.
And she was
we
silly
need
enough
help.
to say yes.
Help us.
How have your views morphed about food bank then? Because some people go into food bank not knowing anything about it. Other people come in knowing lots about it, and that's why they wanted to help in that specific area. But have your views changed? Like, it's a bit different with Rich on the warehouse session because you don't see clients a great deal, so you only just hear numbers of amounts of food going out. But even that can sort of make you think a little bit about our culture and what's happening over the last sort of decade or so.
I think, yeah, sure. I mean, I think when I came in here a year ago, we weren't doing any. I was talking to Steph about this before we started, but we were maybe a dozen boxes of sort of singles, couples, families, and stuff. And now we're doing, we literally don't have enough trestle tables to put the boxes on some days. So,
anyone wants to donate some trestle tables?
Yes, exactly. So, from that perspective, the sessions are always busy, but they're always kind of a bit of a retrograde step, really, aren't they? It's getting worse, not better for people. And I think, the cost of stuff is not going as far as it was, and it's driving more people into using food banks. So while I agree with personally, I agree with the Trussell Trust sort of goal of no need for food banks, it's a big ask in the current environment.
What about your views with, especially dealing with clients face to face as well? So you have a different view as well.
I think there was a lot of views, misconceptions I had before coming to the food bank. So I didn't know you needed a food voucher, for instance, to get access to food at the food bank. I just kind of thought when you needed it, it was just there. I didn't realise that there's a process you need to go through. And I don't know why in my head I thought you would get picks of food, not rather than like it's a pre-packed, this is what you get, and it's like set out the kind of food items you would need for the average person or for the average family. So I think that was very eye-opening, but because I mean it gives them everything they need, but it can still be quite restrictive. I mean, for me personally, we've talked about it a lot because I'm gluten-free. I can't imagine if you have those kind of dietary requirements, how are you going to cope using the food bank?
We just do our best at Thetford, don't we, with
Yes,
the items that come in. We have a little section that's got some of that, but not that much of it comes in, really, does it?
No.
So it's tough. So you've probably heard of the Guarantee Our Essentials campaign that Joseph Rowntree and Trussell are doing together, of basically focusing on raising the level of universal credit from 85 to 100, and I'm going to get this wrong now, but 120, I think it is. And so what are your thoughts on, even if you haven't heard of the campaign or signed up to it, what are your thoughts on the principle of that campaign, and how do you see that contributing to the sort of the broader goal of ending the need for food provision? Because some people think it's the biggest piece of the pie, and others think it's just one of the grains of sand on the beach that need to happen. Have you got any views on it, or about upping benefits?
Well, I mean, I from online, I have seen articles saying that the current, universal benefit only gives you 70% of what you need to actually cover the everyday essentials. So yes, no matter what, it needs to be increased, regardless of your view of food banks. But also then, yes, it is just a grain of sand in the wider scheme of the usage of food banks, because it's increasing now, and that demand's been driven by inflation over the last 18 months. It's gone wild, but there was still a need for food banks prior to that massive inflation increase. So that need will still be there, even with the raised allowances for universal credit.
I broadly agree with that. I think, but it is sort of treating the symptoms and not the causes to a degree. I think you can give people more money and it will go further for a bit, but the real causes of what's driving them into needing food banks is a lot broader than that. I think we were talking before about, the cuts to social care, which means people like yourself are having to act and fill in those gaps. The need hasn't gone away, but the provision of the service has, be that social care, childcare, or whatever, right? So, and it's just pushing those needs onto more frontline services. So I think unless you address that, it's really a stopgap. I don't wish to sound negative, but it is a bit of a stopgap.
No, Trussell, I think, are really clear that there's a whole host of things that need to happen, and I think from their point of view, it's probably that this is the first pin at the front of the 10 pins that they're trying, and it's the one that's policy based at central government that can be people can get behind a really simple campaign of doing this, and I think it's knock that pin down, and then we'll start working on the others. And that's slightly different on a local level. We want to perhaps support that, but do other things all at the same time, which we can maybe get into a little bit as well. But how important do you think public awareness and advocacy is in dealing with the reducing the need for food bank? Because I'm sort of a practical person, as you know. I just like doing things, and that. In the past to me would have been more like, oh, that's, it's not that important. I just want there's a need there, I'll help, as opposed to, getting information out there. I think I've been very good at that really in the past. Probably why we're doing the podcast as well, to get more people more aware of it. But how important do you think, these sort of public awareness campaigns are in actually manifesting change over the decades coming ahead?
Let's go.
I think it's massively important because, if I wasn't aware of, how you go about the process of you even using a food bank and access to food, that people don't know how great of a need it is, how many people are using the food bank. They haven't seen the changes we've seen, where it's rapidly growing, the demand to need the food banks, never mind the fact that, yes, it is a great goal to go for, the fact that we shouldn't be so reliant on food banks. But the problem is we are currently so reliant on food banks because we have so many people who categorically need it. But when people don't use it and they don't talk about it and they don't know that people they know are using food banks, it adds to the problem and a kind of a stigma as well.
I agree with that. I think it is massively important that the public is aware that, just the story we told about a year ago, we were doing a third of what we're doing now. It's getting worse, not better. And I think that news getting out there hopefully lends some public support to what we're trying to do. But I think we're also the other side of the coin is everyone's feeling it, right? Unless you're, you know, I wouldn't name politicians, but unless you're someone very wealthy, then you're not inured to the cost of living crisis or whatever else is going on. So, and I think that sometimes makes people a bit insular. It's like, I need to worry about feeding me and mine, not I can't sort their problems out as well. So you have to kind of break through that somehow, and you know, maybe shining sunshine on it is the way to do it.
Yeah, and I think because especially with things like benefits or food bank use, I think people often split into camps, you know, like with many political, subjects. It's like, we just think this and we just think that, without really having any education about it or any experience in it. And so, like, I think, just shining a light with regard to like campaigning to get the news out there and explain and personal stories. Like, we're hoping to have, food bank client stories through the podcast as well, to sort of show people it's just normal, real people. Because if you've never been in that and experienced that, it can just feel like it's a completely different world.
Yeah. When we were at Tesco for Christmas, we were asking people to donate food and stuff, and you get chatting to some. Some people don't want to. That's fine. Yeah. Some people want to talk to you, and I talked to one lady, and it was a vet bill that pushed them into using the food bank. They just had an unexpected expense, and that was it. It was eating into the food budget. Yeah. But the hamster in this case needed to be fixed. So good they didn't eat it, I guess.
Yeah. That's one way to get around it, I suppose. I think to me it seems like it's required. Like, I've always sort of shied away from it, but I think it's required if we're going to move the needle in any particular direction, particularly with policy, whether it be county council policy of local welfare assistance schemes or national policy. We've got to take sort of the middle of people who might lean one way or the other, not just with elections, but just with policy decisions. And I think the more information out there, the better with regard to that. That said, what is your view then on, because this is getting deep now, I think. What's your
little face change?
Yeah.
Like, here it comes.
Change then.
Because obviously you volunteered for a charity organisation to help people that are in need. So, and I think a type of person is the sort of person who would do that, is a particular type of person. So what role should the community, and I include you in the community, be involved in tackling food poverty? Like, because that's quite a deep philosophical question. It's like a first principles question of society. Is like, should the charity sector be involved in food poverty and coming against it? Or is it, where does the responsibility lie? Like, and there's no right or wrong answer to this, but I want to understand your views, particularly as volunteers. Is it an individual's responsibility? Is it, broader the family? Is it the community or the church or the food banks? Is it the district council, the county council or central government? It's like, I don't think there's a right answer to that. No. But I just want to grasp your views of where the burden lies, where the responsibility lies of who should be tackling food poverty.
Go first on this one.
Sure.
Yeah.
Get some thinking time.
That's fine. I mean, you're right. I don't think there's any one right answer. I mean, going back to the pandemic, I mean, the power of the community when that was happening is massive, right? And it also makes people more compassionate in those situations. So, a properly funded community and some charity from the individuals themselves can move mountains, right? I think, if you could harness that somehow through awareness or, appealing to, as you say, that kind of middle base that does feel compassion, you might go some way to helping folk out. I think I want to pick up on something you said about the stigma of using food banks and stuff like that. There is still that attached to it, right? It's like in some way you failed or, failed to provide for your family or something like that. You have to kind of do away with that. People have been pushed into these circumstances. It wasn't because they, got drunk or bet the wages or, in some cases I'm sure it is, but I'm sure that's the exception, not the rule. So, did that give you enough time?
Yeah.
I was kind of flowering out my answer there.
I'm going to go with everyone as my answer, but I'll break it down. I mean, in any community, there's events, there's things that you do that brings people out of their houses. And we always see it gets a little bit quieter at the food bank over the summer holidays. And that's when people are putting on fairs, people are inviting you around for a barbecue. You are inadvertently not realizing it, but you're opening your doors to more people who needed your help. You just didn't know it. Whereas it gets to winter, people are talking less, they're socializing less, there's less events in the community, and there's more reliance on food banks. So, I mean, communities are already trying to do something. They just don't know it when it comes to the summertime, and people don't know when they're just inviting their friends over for a barbecue, how much of a weight they're taking off other people's shoulders when it comes to that. So it's everyone, it's your friends. You don't know they're using the food bank. You know we've had people come in, clients, who have shied away from trying to use the front door because their relatives live nearby and they don't want them to know they're using the food bank. And that's so heartbreaking that the stigma means you don't want family to know that you're using the food bank. Whereas I think we'd all agree we'd want to help family if we knew that they were struggling.
And that's what I mean. I think society's become so atomised that it's like them normal relationships between, individuals, communities, families are sort of disconnected. And I don't know if there's a danger, or maybe I'm asking you, do you think there is a danger of putting too much onus on like central government and policy to be the fix of food poverty or food insecurity or people falling on hard times, and there should be, a welfare system that steps in rapidly and is good? I think most people would agree that's the purpose of it. But is there a danger of, doing that so well that communities actually become further separated and atomised within individuals because it's not our responsibility to one another anymore? It's someone else up there in London somewhere. Do you think there's a danger to banging that drum too much, even though we probably all agree the welfare system probably needs more expansion?
I think in the current environment, there's a tendency to, put a sticking plaster on whatever issues coming up first, like it's childcare or it's frontline nursing or whatever. There just doesn't seem to be much a forethought for what communities are going to need, sort of thing, and they cut back services, and it makes the problem even worse. So I think there needs to be a balance. I think the funding has to come from a central pot. It also needs to come from raising charitable donations and stuff, but it also needs a mobilisation of the community, and that comes from, as you say, breaking down stigma. And it should be all right to help your neighbour if they're in bother, right?
It seems to me that perhaps
why does it need a pandemic for that to?
Right. It's like the needle shifted too far towards the charity sector to be reliant on fixing this problem. I think it's probably quite easy for central government, whoever's in power, to be like, there's this need, but the charity sector's doing a marvellous job at fixing it, and so let them run. It must be very tempting to do that. But I think it's got to the point where it's now we've maxed that out, and the balance is not quite right between central government, local government, and just an individual or community.
I don't think you can bang the drum loud enough or often enough when it comes to the government and the policies. I mean, charities stepped in during 2010, 2011. Trussell Trust took on the fact that they saw there was a gap. There's people struggling to put food on the table. We're going to help them. And then they spread out up and down the country because the need was there. And yes, now it's too easy for the government to say, well, they're stepping up, they're helping. But they only stepped in because the government was failing to actually address it and do anything adequately enough. And all of our communities are shrinking because the libraries are closing down. The places where you'd see the advertisements for local community events, everything is getting smaller and smaller in the communities.
I think it's also those things stimulate community,
yes,
and
exactly.
they're being eroded. So
I mean, that also adds to the people's effort of being able to come together as a community, because without those resources, where do you congregate? You are outside in the winter and there's nowhere for you to try and invite people inside.
I agree. I mean, on the erosion point, I think you got people working harder to make ends meet. There's less bandwidth for philanthropic activity, right? It just it's a vicious kind of circle.
I just wanted to take a minute, while I've got one, to ask you to please subscribe to the channel and click the notifications bell. It only takes a second. Come on, you can do it. Do it. Thanks.
So, factors beyond benefits. So let's put the benefit system aside for a minute and all that sort of thing. Are there any major other factors that you think contribute to food poverty from your own experiences, or maybe from experiences in the food bank, or, you know, just chats within the warehouse, or just your experience in life generally, that are sort of not financial, if you know what I mean, more social, or anything that's outside of like maximising income? Are there any other biggies that you think that we could be tackling as a society? So then, taking the financial side off the table, like what other things, you know, should we be addressing generally, do you think? So it could be anything from education, like we talked to a few people who think it's like skills gaps, like where it's
100%.
like, oh, yeah.
I mean, I can remember, food tech at school, and one of the podcasts I saw you talking about it, but my food tech classes were like, how to make a pizza, and it was puff pastry, and you put tomato puree on it.
Is that not how you make pizza? Imagine the Italians watching
No, like and it was ready. It was just puff pastry. All we had to do in the class was to roll it out, and essentially it was a class to how do you turn on an oven. That's essentially what the crux of that came down. That's the only thing I took away from that, other than I can unroll this already prepackaged item.
So you got an A star in that then, yeah?
Did you go to the same schools then?
We probably did, but I definitely didn't get an A star in cooking.
I did not
You're
get an
saying
A
it
star.
like it's a bad thing.
But I mean, like, I didn't come away from any of those lessons actually knowing how to cook.
Yeah.
You know, and I know I got to university and I had friends who didn't know how to boil pasta. They put pasta inside the kettle, you know, and I know that sounds...
And they were at university.
I know.
That sounds quite smart, actually. Did it work? 'Cause maybe that is the way to do it.
No, it's boiled long enough.
Burn onto the actual, but like the basic life skills of being able to cook, and chop up vegetables. It sounds simple, but you know, like, people don't know to chop up vegetables, and it's crazy seeing TikTok trends of people talking about how to cook chicken and being like, let's have it medium rare. Like, you know,
It's always
like,
rare, isn't it?
I choose life.
but you're like, that's just like the simple conversations around meat and which ones you can have medium rare, and how you shouldn't with poultry. You just shouldn't.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I agree. There definitely seems to be a gap there in people having learnt those things, and including myself.
I agree with the practical side of stuff. People should know how to wire a plug and stuff like that. But
I can't do that
that's my weakness now, isn't it?
that's good to know.
Or change a tyre.
Yeah, or change a tyre. Yeah, well, I didn't manage to change it either. But I think there's also the more sort of social side of it, right? There's tolerance and stuff to be taught at school, and, you know, mental awareness and community. Those things have to be embedded in at a fairly early age and realise how important they are. In a class of whatever it is now, 30, there will be at least 5 of those kids who are probably getting food from a food bank or relying on some other charitable service, right?
So, obviously, you're aware that we've brought in citizens advice workers into all of our sessions in Thetford, Watton and Attleborough, and to sort of trying to address some of the needs and financial inclusion, trying to get people's incomes up, be that usually through the benefit system as well. But are there any other projects that you could think that we as the food bank could get involved in, like? Because there's a whole host of things.
Just be careful what you say, though, because you're volunteers, all right? So I'm going to be bringing you in now.
Well, I'm only allowed in the warehouse. So personally, I think if I ever find that person who puts the custard in the rice pudding, that's
They're dead.
Yeah, that's that.
But obviously, we've got Your Own Place working on session as well. But we've had, you know, conversations with people like Mind and British Red Cross. And all other sorts of organisations, but are there any others that you think we could be partnering with, you know, from your experiences in life, that could make a big dent in some of the, not just financial issues, but some of the wider social issues that feed into the need for food banks? Anything that we should be doing? Like, and I say we, because you're our 18 volunteers.
Did Trussell Trust speak to schools, try and educate people on this stuff?
Yeah, so they do encourage you to go into schools. It's not something we've branched out into. Rich, is it something you're interested in?
See what we're doing here? Head of schools, Rich.
So yeah, there are programs that you can do to get involved in, and they've recently brought out the game, haven't they? Which is
What's that?
it's a game that they
board
encourage
game, yeah.
young children to play that teaches them about, you know, how to run finances of a home and stuff like
okay.
that. So
Is that what it is it? I haven't actually played it. I have to hold my hand up.
It's a bit like the game of life kind of thing.
Oh.
And when would you use a food bank if you hadn't got... So it's interesting. But yes, there are opportunities to do that. We just haven't got enough volunteers.
Yeah, but I think she's looking at the camera. But I think Trussell don't do anything centrally, but just trying to equip all the local food banks to do it. So there are other food banks who go into schools and do bits with some hit and miss with the results of that. So I think schools are so burdened with so many different things that they're expected to do now.
Yeah.
And I can't teach any kids to cook, so it's no good me going in there.
No, but even just the finance side, you know, we've had many guests on who think, you know, the education around finance should be up.
Learning about budgeting and things like
Yeah,
that.
even how you're getting your first mortgage and what to look for and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
That, you know, I'm quite good with that sort of stuff, and I didn't learn it until I actually had already bought a house and then learned how to.
My son's just put a bid in on a house in the recent days, and he phoned up his mother and was shouting and screaming because he didn't know what stamp tax was. And he was presented with a bill for his stamp tax, and I don't know, magically thought we were going to pay it from the porridge pot or something. I don't know.
But any other coordination or working with other agencies or anything that you think would be really helpful for us? Because we don't want it all to come from us all the time, but, you know, getting your guys' sort of thoughts on what we could do on session, outside of session, or anything that we could do that you think could make an impact locally.
I think, you know, like with when people come in with the food vouchers, or when they they've not been with us before, and we register then why they've come to food bank today. And in some of the cases, then we'd know their exact reasoning for why they've come in. There could be a room for some of the reasons to be linked up then with recommending specialist advice then with the banks. That is something, you know, for people that are over indebted, that have got too much on their plate that they can't afford to, because all of the banks and building societies, like, they do have programs all set up for you to be able to contact them for payment plans, you know, like if they do have a lot of debt. I think a lot of people get to the point where they'll miss a payment before speaking to any of their banks, whereas they can help before you miss that payment.
Same
they can
with
reduce
utility
it.
providers as well, isn't it?
Exactly. And it's about, you know, like trying to address then, right, okay, so what is it you're struggling with? Have you spoken to your bank? Because on top of citizens' advice and everything, the bank is supposed to help them, or building society.
Would the banks come into session to educate people about that?
So I can't speak for the other banks, but nationwide they do go into schools and they do have sessions of teaching them what credit is and how to finance and how to budget. And back when I was working as a teacher, you know, we did have different banks would approach us about doing a money learning session, and we would just use the slides they sent over and then teach them ourselves rather than someone actually physically came in. But there is these kind of programs that can be done at school, but at the same time, it's kind of like a new thing that they're all doing in the recent years. That there's this gap then of people that's left school that didn't have that help, didn't have that access.
So maybe implementing something like that within the food bank for our clients could.
Yeah, and I mean, there's lots of links and websites we could show them. I mean, I shouldn't say it, but Halifax have some great stuff on their website.
Do you need me to edit that out?
Yeah, no,
I'll beep it out like a swear word.
Because they have a section on like what is credit, how to break it down, and how you're paying for things. Because people take out a loan or they take out a credit card and they don't actually fully know the ramifications of the payments. And I mean, Martin Lewis's website's great for dissecting that, but at the same time, his website's so great. It's full of so much information. You can get lost down a hole sometimes.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Because like how ignorant you can be until you're in something.
Yes.
And like we were talking to our son literally just before we came out the door about how a loan works from a bank. And that they charge interest, and he thought it was ridiculous that anyone would make money off lending money. And I'm like, well, this is the way the whole markets work. And he's 13, you know. And like, I'm glad we had this conversation before.
It's literally one of the oldest professions is lending money.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So that could be something that we do. We have had links with other organisations that do that sort of training, and even budgeting courses, all that sort of stuff. But it is something we could do, and I like it because it's sort of balanced, isn't it? It's someone else's responsibility to do this, or it's an individual's own like it's all them. It's like it's both of them things at the same time.
You mentioned tying up with the Red Cross. How would that work?
Well, we've got a meeting with them
next week.
Yeah, next week. They work with Norwich Food Bank, so they go to a lot of their sessions, and I think they tend to deal with clients who've got a lot of different situations going on, let's say, and their citizens advice worker will take all of the financial stuff.
Right.
And the Red Cross will take on all the other perhaps social needs that need dealing with as well. Because you can throw money at some problems and it doesn't help if other things aren't addressed. Like in big organisations, it's the same. So with an individual, I think it's the same as well. And so I think that's the key. But we don't know yet. So we'll try and convince them to come and talk on the podcast. Okay. And then
can I just go back to the whole budgeting stuff and courses? I think for me, that's something I have always really wanted to push in the food bank, that and the cooking side of things, to help people and educate people, like you say, to know how to make a basic chili or bolognese and things like that. But something that I think I've stumbled on, and we've worked in the community with different groups that have tried to do that, is people don't want to admit that they can't cook or can't make something basic and they can't budget. Because like you said earlier, it's that stigma of maybe being a failure, or, being ashamed that I should know how to do this, but I don't know how to. And so it's interesting to how do we get over that stigma, I suppose, and encourage people that come into the food bank and be like, look, we know you've got this situation. Let us help, without people being like, oh, you think I'm rubbish at this. Because that's something I think we can only get if we build relationship with clients.
I agree.
And so it's sometimes, because obviously some of our clients may be there for a while, but some we may only see once, or twice, or maybe 3 times. And so it's trying to, like you say, get enough information out of people to help them enough.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I'm not asking you a question. I'm just saying that it's how do we get over that stigma of people struggling and yet helping them,
especially on a busy session now. So on the other Wednesday,
do you not serve a bowl of chili? And
they say, would you like to know how to cook this?
Do you want to know how to cook it? Not your pizza though, Alice.
No, God no.
So what we do, we have our last question, which is the same every time we do a podcast, which is what should we be talking about on the podcast, or generally in society, or within the food bank, that feeds into ending food poverty. So open-ended question of what are other major things in society do we need to talk about and fix to try and, hopefully in maybe 10 years, shut ourselves down.
For me, it's one of the earlier points. It's about teaching tolerance at a very early age and teaching what community means, and try and do as much as one can to remove that stigma. Those people over there, I don't have any money, I don't want to mix with them. That should, that's not what we want our kids to feel about other people, right? You want them to feel compassion. You want to feel if they can help, they should help. And that's kind of why we're here, right?
That's interesting, because I suppose we've always grown up in a working class town around, I went to the rough school at the end of town, and I suppose never felt like I experienced that until I played Eastern Counties rugby, which was full of private school boys, and then suddenly thought, oh, this is actually a thing. I'd never experienced that before, that there was even that intolerance towards me. I was completely blind for it. So do you think that's still rife then in society?
Yeah, I grew up in a semi-detached council house in a fairly affluent area, so I kind of experienced it firsthand. I mean, we were poor. We used to hide behind the sofa when the debt collectors came round and stuff, and yet down the road, people were having 2 skiing holidays. You can't. It does exist. There's a whole spectrum in some of these state schools, and the people at the bottom end of that earning or social strata, whatever you want to call it, they do feel it. And I think you have to kind of teach kids. I don't believe a bit of a cliche as it sounds. I don't think kids are born to be particularly nasty to other kids. They are kind of inherit those behaviours and stuff, and they need to be educated that it's, tolerance is a good thing, compassion is a good thing. There are people who've got more than you and less than you, and you should be equally nice to both.
I think that perfectly feeds in well to one of your first questions about public awareness, because if you've never firsthand seen it, if you've never firsthand not been able to put food on the table or have money coming in month to month, and you've not known anyone to have those struggles, you're never going to understand people that are struggling, ever.
I agree.
And if there's not that public awareness, people that were always affluent, have always been affluent, have never struggled, are never, ever going to understand. Unless there is that, I don't know how to word it, but unless there's that push for that public awareness and to keep the conversation going on it, they just won't understand.
Well, hopefully that's what we're doing here.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Thank you so much, guys, for coming today. We really do appreciate you giving up your time, not just tonight, but
Every week.
The food bank. And it's amazing what you guys do. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. Please don't miss out on future podcasts. I think we have got another one coming up for you soon.
2 weeks' time.
Yeah, and we've got 3 people to that podcast.
3 guests.
I think I've been kicked out. So don't miss out on brand new podcasts coming up. We'll see you then.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Hublife Podcast, then why not check out another one over here, or try something a little different over there.